We're counting down to the Cricket World Cup in India. It's just 5 months away. Last time India hosted it, we won the whole thing. So this time, expectations are huge, but so are controversies. Pakistan, for one, is threatening to boycott the tournament. First, listen in to their cricket board chief.
I'm not worried about the Asia Cup. It's the World Cup, and India should not be looking at a situation where we end up boycotting the Asia Cup and also the World Cup, and then India ends up boycotting the Champions Trophy. There'll be a huge mess.
Why is Pakistan threatening a boycott? Because India has refused to play in Pakistan. There's another major tournament scheduled before the World Cup. That's the Asia Cup. It's slated for September and Pakistan is hosting. But the BCCI says India will not go. No prizes for guessing why. Pakistan's security situation is still bad. More than 430 terror attacks were reported until April. Total casualties, more than 850 people dead and injured. So naturally, the BCCI is wary. You see, the men in blue are not just a cricket team for us. They represent a lot more. They're India's global ambassadors. So sending them to Pakistan is a huge risk. When India objected, Pakistan came back with a plan. What if Team India's matches were played elsewhere, perhaps in the UAE? The other teams could still play in Pakistan. Well, no luck so far. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and India have rejected this plan, and each for their own reason. Which brings us to the World Cup in October. Pakistan wants to play tit for tat. They say, if you can't play in Pakistan, we won't play in India. And what is the BCCI saying? No official statement so far, but from the looks of it, they won't budge. Not unless the ICC decides to intervene. That's the International Cricket Council, ICC. Now, what do we make of this Pakistani threat? Are they serious or are they bluffing? Just look at what's happening in their country. Until last week, the BCCI had just one worry, and that was terror attacks. But now there's a full-blown constitutional crisis in Pakistan. You have protests, you have crackdowns, and you have tanks rolling on the streets. Pakistan cannot handle one ex-cricketer. Can they really handle dozens from India? Seems unlikely. The fact is, Pakistan's security situation is not acceptable. Certainly not for Team India to visit. So what's the solution? Maybe the ICC can broker some deal, perhaps convince India to play its matches outside Pakistan or simply pull the entire tournament from the country. And that's the big worry for Pakistan, really. If they lose hosting rights, they also lose a lot of money. How much money are we talking about? Around $3 million. So Pakistan needs the Asia Cup. They need the revenue more than the actual trophy. It's unfortunate for Pakistani fans, but they should know who to blame. Their own politicians and generals. Time for a short detour. Do you know why Pakistan doesn't host major tournaments anymore? Because of what happened in 2009. The Sri Lankan team was attacked by terrorists. 6 of them were wounded in the attack. It was after 2009 that cricket left Pakistan, and now we are told things are different. That Pakistan is safe again. I can tell you what the stock arguments are. Sri Lanka toured Pakistan in 2019, England toured in 2022, Australia also toured in the same year. But here's a question. Does Pakistan sponsor terror attacks in Australia? Does it claim sovereign English territory? Does it send terrorists to attack Sri Lankan cities? I don't think so. They're capable of it, but they haven't really done it yet. But India has suffered all of it. So the Australian team may feel safe in Pakistan, but an Indian team will not, especially the most powerful and popular team in Indian sport. That's one part of the argument. The second is linking politics and sports. A lot of people will say, don't do it. Don't link politics and sports. But how many of them have a neighbor who uses terror as state policy? I guess none. The last India-Pakistan bilateral was played in 2012-2013. Pakistan came to India back then. The year before that, in 2011, India hosted the World Cup. Team India played Pakistan in the semi-finals. Former Prime Minister of India, Manmohan Singh, invited the Pakistani Prime Minister to watch the match. You may remember these pictures. It was called cricket diplomacy. Let's go even further back. To 2003-2004, the Indian team travelled to Pakistan. This was just 4 years after Kargil. It was called a big diplomatic gesture. But what did India get in return on all these occasions? Betrayals and more terror attacks. You see, the idea of linking politics and sports is not some outdated and narrow ideology. It's happened throughout history. And India has a valid reason to do so. Why make money for the Pakistani Cricket Board? Why give lucrative IPL contracts to Pakistani players? And don't get me wrong, this is not about punishing the Pakistani public or their players. This is about putting a squeeze on the top bosses. It's much like how sanctions work. So Pakistan would do well to get its own house in order first. Perhaps figure out how to deal with their raging captain before hosting neighbours. Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.